BTS news today. The moment lasted no longer than a breath, yet it was enough to send shockwaves across the global fandom. It wasn't a dramatic announcement, nor a press release, nor a staged moment under blinding lights. It was simple, quiet, almost casual. Jungkook, speaking softly during a late-night live session, addressed Jimin with a nickname that had never been heard before. The tone was gentle, familiar, weighted with something deeper than friendship, heavier than habit. Within minutes, clips spread across social media, slowed down, zoomed in, replayed endlessly. Fans froze the frame, dissected the syllables, and asked the question that would soon dominate timelines worldwide. Was this just another affectionate inside joke, or had Jungkook unintentionally revealed something far bigger? The nickname itself was not flashy. That was what made it unsettling. It wasn't playful or exaggerated. It carried an intimacy that felt lived in, like a word used behind closed doors rather than in front of millions. Jungkook said it without hesitation, without correcting himself, without laughter to soften the impact. Jimin's reaction was even more telling. There was no surprise, no confusion. Instead, he smiled in that way fans recognized instantly, the quiet smile he wore when he felt safe, when something didn't need explaining. Within an hour, hashtags trended across continents. Fans who had followed BTS for over a decade felt the ground shift beneath them. This was not the first time Jungkook and Jimin had been at the center of speculation, but something about this moment felt different. It lacked performance. It lacked spectacle. It felt real. Longtime observers began connecting dots that had once seemed insignificant. The matching jewelry that appeared months apart. The shared glances during interviews when certain questions were asked. The way Jungkook's voice softened whenever he spoke Jimin's name, as if the world shrank to the space between them. Individually, each moment could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern that was suddenly impossible to ignore. Industry insiders were quick to remain silent. HYBE issued no statement, no clarifications followed. The absence of denial only fueled speculation. In K-pop, silence is rarely accidental. Fans knew this. They had seen it before. Silence could mean protection, it could mean boundaries, or it could mean the truth was too personal to be addressed publicly. The nickname itself became the center of countless analyses. Linguists weighed in, explaining how the word carried connotations of lifelong partnership rather than casual affection. Korean fans noted its rarity in public speech, especially between men in the entertainment industry. International fans compared it to similar terms used in private contexts, often reserved for spouses or life partners. None of this confirmed anything, yet none of it felt coincidental either. What unsettled many was Jungkook's expression immediately after saying it. There was a pause, a brief stillness, as if he realized too late that he had crossed an invisible line between private life and public stage. For a split second, his eyes flickered toward Jimin, not with panic, but with something closer to trust. Jimin responded with a nod so subtle it could have been missed, yet it grounded the moment. Whatever that word meant, they both understood it fully. Fans began revisiting old footage with renewed perspective. Moments once dismissed as playful suddenly felt weighted with intention. The night Jungkook admitted he felt most comfortable when Jimin was beside him. The interview where Jimin said he imagined growing old surrounded by familiar voices, his gaze drifting instinctively toward Jungkook. The countless times they found each other in crowded rooms without looking. Patterns emerged, not forced, but quietly persistent. Critics argued that fans were projecting, that affection between bandmates had always been exaggerated. Yet even skeptics admitted something felt different this time. The energy around the moment was not chaotic. It was reverent. Fans weren't screaming for confirmation, they were whispering as if afraid to break something fragile. Cultural context made the situation even more complex. In South Korea, public discussions of same-sex relationships remain sensitive, especially for global idols whose every move is scrutinized. If Jungkook and Jimin were indeed sharing something deeper, it would not be revealed through headlines or announcements. It would surface in moments like this, unguarded, human, fleeting. Some fans questioned whether the nickname could symbolize a private commitment, something akin to a marriage in spirit if not in law. Others believed it might represent a promise, a bond forged through years of shared struggle, fame, and vulnerability. The idea of marriage in this context became less about legality and more about devotion, a partnership built not on ceremonies but on endurance. The emotional response from fans was overwhelming. Many expressed not shock but gratitude. Gratitude that their favorite artists might have found something real in an industry notorious for isolation. Gratitude that love in any form could exist quietly even under relentless scrutiny. For others, the moment stirred discomfort, forcing them to confront their own expectations of idols and the limits placed on them. As the clip continued to circulate, edits emerged pairing the nickname with past moments that now felt prophetic. Lyrics Jungkook had written about choosing one person against the world. Lines Jimin sang about finding home in another's presence. Whether intentional or not, the parallels were impossible to ignore. Still, no confirmation came. Days passed. New schedules resumed, performances continued, yet something had shifted. Fans noticed a new tenderness between them, subtle but unmistakable. A hand resting longer than necessary, a shared laugh that lingered. The nickname was not repeated publicly, but it didn't need to be. It had already done its work. The question remained unanswered, suspended between speculation and belief. Was it a marriage confirmation? Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but for many, it symbolized something just as profound. A bond chosen freely, nurtured quietly, and revealed not through declarations, but through a single word spoken without fear. And maybe that was the point. In a world obsessed with labels and proof, Jungkook's new nickname reminded everyone that the most meaningful truths often surface unintentionally, not as announcements but as slips of the heart. After the initial shock settled, what followed was not chaos but contemplation. The fandom did not explode outward, it folded inward. Instead of demanding answers, fans began listening more carefully than ever before. Every pause in Jungkook's speech, every micro-expression on Jimin's face, every shift in body language during public appearances was observed with an intensity that bordered on reverence. It was as if the nickname had unlocked a new lens, one that reframed years of shared history into something more intimate, more deliberate. Psychologists who specialize in parasocial relationships began weighing in through essays and long threads, not to debunk the moment, but to explain why it resonated so deeply. According to them, the power of the nickname lay not in what it explicitly meant, but in how it was delivered. Jungkook did not perform the word. He did not emphasize it. He did not check the reaction. That lack of self-monitoring suggested habitual use. Words we use daily often escape our awareness, especially when spoken to the person they are meant for. This, experts argued, was not a rehearsed slip, it was muscle memory. Jimin's response became an even greater point of discussion. In moments of surprise, people instinctively react outwardly. They laugh, flinch, correct, or deflect. Jimin did none of those things. Instead, his reaction was inward, a small smile, a softened gaze, the kind of reaction one gives when something deeply familiar is acknowledged in an unfamiliar space. To many fans, that reaction spoke louder than the word itself. Across South Korea, online communities dissected the cultural implications. Some Korean fans emphasized that such a nickname, while not impossible between close friends, carries a weight that changes entirely when spoken publicly. It is the kind of word that implies responsibility, constancy, and emotional exclusivity, not ownership but belonging. Others cautioned against overinterpretation, reminding international fans of the nuances of language and tone. Yet even among the cautious voices, there was an undercurrent of agreement. This moment felt different. International media outlets tread carefully. Headlines used question marks. Articles leaned heavily on phrases like fans speculate and interpreted by viewers. Still, the fact that major publications acknowledged the moment at all was telling. In an industry where rumors are often ignored unless unavoidable, this one lingered. It refused to disappear. Behind the scenes, industry analysts noted a subtle shift in how Jungkook and Jimin were positioned during schedules. Seating arrangements placed them closer. Camera work lingered on shared moments just a second longer than before. Whether intentional or coincidental, it gave the impression of quiet acceptance rather than damage control. There were no forced separations, no visible attempts to redirect attention. If anything, the atmosphere suggested trust. The concept of marriage began evolving within fan discussions, less about legal definitions and more about emotional contracts. Fans spoke about the idea of a chosen family, something BTS themselves had emphasized countless times over the years. Jungkook and Jimin had grown up together under extraordinary circumstances. They had faced fame, criticism, exhaustion, and isolation side by side. In that context, marriage became a metaphor for permanence. For choosing the same person again and again, even when the world demanded distance. Older interviews resurfaced, now charged with new meaning. Jungkook once said that the person he loved most was someone who understood him without words. Jimin once admitted that Jungkook was the only one who could calm him without speaking. At the time, these statements were seen as expressions of deep friendship. Now, they felt like fragments of a larger story that had been unfolding quietly for years. There was also resistance. Some fans felt fear more than excitement. Fear that speculation could harm them. Fear that pushing the narrative too far could invite backlash. Fear that something precious could be exposed before it was ready. These voices urged restraint, reminding others that Jungkook and Jimin had always guarded their private lives fiercely. Love, if it existed, deserved protection. Yet even among those urging caution, few denied the emotional gravity of the moment. The nickname had not created something new, it had revealed something already there. What made the situation unprecedented was the timing. BTS were no longer rookies bound tightly by restrictive contracts. They were global artists with individual agency, veterans of an industry they had helped redefine. If this moment had happened years earlier, it might have been erased quickly. Now, it was allowed to breathe. Days turned into weeks and the fandom noticed something else. Jungkook appeared calmer, Jimin appeared lighter. Their interactions carried less self-consciousness, as if a burden had quietly lifted. There were no grand gestures, no confessions, just consistency, the kind that doesn't seek validation. Sociologists pointed out that modern audiences are increasingly drawn to authenticity over spectacle. The reason this moment captivated millions was precisely because it lacked drama. It felt human. In an era of curated personas, a single unfiltered word felt revolutionary. Was it a marriage confirmation? Legally, no. Publicly, no. But emotionally, symbolically, many fans believed it was something just as binding. A confirmation not of status, but of choice. A quiet acknowledgement of a bond that had already survived everything the world could throw at it. And perhaps the most powerful part of the story was this: Jungkook never took it back, he never clarified, he never laughed it off. Sometimes silence is not avoidance, sometimes it is consent. As fans continue to watch, to listen, and to feel, one truth remains undeniable. Whatever that nickname meant, it was real enough to change how millions saw them. And once something real is seen, it cannot be unseen. Long before Jungkook's voice softened around that single word, long before Jimin's smile answered without surprise, K-pop itself had already been quietly rehearsing moments like this. The industry, often perceived as rigid and manufactured, has always contained undercurrents of intimacy that could never be fully scripted. Duets who moved as one, bonds that outlasted contracts, relationships that resisted definition because definitions were too small to hold them. What made this moment different was not that it existed, but that it was felt so clearly by so many at once. Veteran fans began drawing parallels to history, not to provoke controversy but to contextualize emotion. In earlier generations of idols, deep partnerships were often hidden in plain sight, protected by ambiguity and silence. The public was allowed to see devotion as long as it could be labeled brotherhood. Anything beyond that was erased, reframed, or left unnamed. What Jungkook's nickname did was disrupt that pattern. It didn't shout rebellion. It didn't demand recognition. It simply existed, unbothered by interpretation. That subtlety mattered. Loud declarations invite defense mechanisms. Quiet truths invite reflection. Cultural historians pointed out that in many societies, including Korea's own past, marriage was not always defined by ceremonies or legality. There were unions recognized by loyalty, by shared labor, by endurance, people who lived as one long before anyone named it as such. In that sense, fans weren't imagining something radical when they spoke of marriage. They were recognizing a form of commitment older than paperwork. This reframing changed how people viewed Jungkook and Jimin's entire dynamic. Their closeness no longer felt like something that needed explanation. It felt like something that had finally been allowed to remain unexplained. The future implications became a subject of quiet fascination. Would this moment change how they interacted publicly? Would they retreat, become more guarded, more distant? Many expected a tightening of boundaries, a cooling off. Instead, the opposite seemed to happen. Their presence together became steadier, less performative. They didn't increase affection to prove anything, nor did they erase it to protect an image. They simply continued as they were. That continuity was perhaps the strongest confirmation fans could receive. People hiding something fragile tend to overcorrect. People living in truth do not. Industry experts noted that BTS as a group had long negotiated a unique balance between privacy and openness. They spoke honestly about fear, burnout, love for each other, and the desire for normalcy. Jungkook and Jimin's moment fit into that legacy. It was not a rupture from BTS's story, but an extension of it. A reminder that authenticity had always been their quiet rebellion. For Jungkook, the youngest who grew up under the gaze of the world, the slip felt especially significant. He had spent years learning how to protect himself with humor, with vagueness, with carefully chosen words. To let one fall through unfiltered suggested a shift, not recklessness but confidence. The confidence that comes when one no longer feels the need to compartmentalize every part of life. For Jimin, whose emotional intelligence had always been his defining strength, the acceptance was equally telling. He did not attempt to redirect. He did not create distance. His response suggested peace, not anxiety, as if whatever that nickname represented had already been settled long ago. Fans began speaking less about proof and more about permission. Permission to believe that idols could build lives that did not revolve solely around public expectation. Permission to imagine futures that included partnership, stability, and love beyond the stage. Permission to let go of the need to know everything. This, more than any speculation, marked a turning point. The conversation around queerness in K-pop also shifted subtly. There were no labels applied by Jungkook or Jimin, none were needed. The moment existed in a space beyond categorization. It wasn't about identity politics, it was about connection. That universality allowed people from different backgrounds to see themselves reflected without being told what to see. Critics who attempted to dismiss the moment as fan delusion found themselves speaking into a void, not because fans were defensive, but because they were calm. The certainty didn't come from insistence, it came from recognition. People recognized truth not by arguing for it, but by resting in it. As time passed, the nickname transformed from a shock into a symbol, a reminder that intimacy does not always announce itself, that love does not require witnesses to be valid, that some of the most important commitments are made quietly, sustained privately, and revealed only by accident. What lies ahead remains unwritten. Jungkook and Jimin may never address the moment directly, they may never define it, and that may be exactly the point. In refusing to name it, they protect it. In letting it exist without explanation, they keep it human. Was it a marriage confirmation? For those seeking headlines, perhaps not. For those who understand marriage as devotion, as choosing one person repeatedly in a world that demands performance, the answer feels less uncertain. Some truths are not confirmed by statements, they are confirmed by time. And time so far has only deepened what that single word revealed. Something unusual happened after the nickname settled into collective memory. The fandom, long known for its volume, learned how to whisper. There were no mass demands for clarification, no coordinated pressure campaigns, no insistence on labels or explanations. Instead, a softer culture emerged almost organically, one built on restraint rather than obsession. Fans began reminding one another that some moments are not invitations to pry but signals to pause. In a digital world addicted to immediacy, that pause felt radical. This shift mattered because it revealed how deeply Jungkook and Jimin's bond had influenced not just emotions but behavior. The nickname did not turn fans into investigators, it turned them into guardians. Discussions evolved. Instead of asking, "Is this real?" fans asked, "How do we protect what might be real?" The ethics of speculation became a central topic. Many acknowledged that curiosity was natural but entitlement was not. Loving artists, they realized, did not grant ownership over their truths. Veteran ARMY reflected on how far the fandom had come. In earlier years, any hint of intimacy sparked wars between interpretations. Now, there was a collective maturity born from years of watching BTS navigate pressure with grace. Jungkook and Jimin had taught fans unintentionally how to love without consuming. Media behavior changed as well. Some outlets attempted to sensationalize the moment, framing it as scandal or shock. Their articles fell flat. Engagement was lower than expected. Readers weren't looking for drama, they were looking for understanding. The public appetite had shifted and the media lagged behind. Cultural critics began noting that this was not just about two idols. It was about a generational change in how intimacy is perceived. Younger audiences were less interested in defining relationships and more interested in honoring them. Labels mattered less than authenticity. Declarations mattered less than consistency. Years from now, when fans look back on the long, winding story of BTS, this moment may not stand out because of what was said, but because of what was allowed to remain unsaid. In an era defined by oversharing and instant clarification, Jungkook's nickname for Jimin became something rare, a moment that resisted resolution, and in doing so, it gained power. As time moved forward, the industry did what it always does. New debuts arrived, new controversies surfaced, new headlines competed for attention. Yet among ARMY, the memory of that word never disappeared. It lingered quietly, resurfacing not in arguments but in reflections. Fans would mention it in passing, not to reignite debate, but to acknowledge a turning point. A moment when something deeply human slipped through the machinery of idol life and stayed intact. What made the legacy enduring was not confirmation, but consistency. Jungkook and Jimin did not change who they were to fit a narrative, nor did they dismantle their closeness to erase one. They continued to exist as they always had, with a steadiness that spoke louder than explanations ever could. Over time, fans realized that if something were fragile or mistaken, it would have cracked under the weight of silence. Instead, it held. Cultural commentators later described the moment as a quiet case study in modern intimacy. Not just romantic or platonic, but relational intimacy under surveillance. Two people navigating global fame while preserving something private, not by hiding it aggressively, but by refusing to weaponize it for validation. In that sense, the nickname was not a leak, it was a glimpse. As BTS's story continued, themes of choice and authenticity became even more pronounced. Members spoke openly about building lives that felt true to them beyond expectations and scripts. Within that broader narrative, Jungkook and Jimin's moment fit seamlessly. It felt less like an exception and more like a reflection of the values they had spent years cultivating. For many fans, the idea of marriage evolved once again. It no longer needed to be debated. It became symbolic shorthand for something deeper, emotional permanence, the kind of bond that does not ask permission from the public, the kind that does not require recognition to endure. Whether or not Jungkook and Jimin ever chose to define their relationship publicly became irrelevant to those who had learned to see beyond labels. The most profound impact, perhaps, was personal. Countless fans shared stories of how the moment helped them reconsider their own relationships. Some felt validated in loving quietly. Others found courage in the idea that commitment does not have to look a certain way to be real. In this unexpected way, a single word spoken casually became a mirror for millions. Critically, the fandom's response matured into something that outlived the speculation itself. Respect became the default. When new fans arrived and asked questions, they were met not with theories but with reminders: watch carefully but gently, care without consuming, admire without demanding. That cultural inheritance became part of what it meant to be ARMY. Looking back, historians of pop culture may one day mark this as a subtle shift in idol fan dynamics. Not a revolution, but an evolution. A moment when audiences proved they could handle ambiguity without panic. When love, in its quietest form, was allowed to exist without being torn apart by curiosity. And Jungkook's nickname? It never needed to be repeated. Its power was never in frequency, but in truth. Like vows whispered rather than spoken aloud, it did not belong to the world. It belonged to the people who understood it. So was it a marriage confirmation? Perhaps the better question is this: does every marriage need confirmation, or are some simply lived? In the end, the story did not conclude with answers, it concluded with understanding. And sometimes, understanding is the most honest ending a story can have.